Are the Bruins soft and delusional? Mick Cronin seems to think so. Let's go through a Mick Cronin history lesson to see if they'll actually break through this so-called slump they're in.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe, download, review. Thanks for your support. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Where we get started today is the Bruins are in a bit of a rut. They're down bad after getting kind of beat up by Michigan, right? Losing by 19 at home, a game where there could have been better circumstances in that game. The Bruins were with a lot of momentum in the second half, and then they get cooked in the end of the second part of that second half. And then Mick Cronin goes on an absolute tirade, right? And maybe you're sitting there at home, you've listened to the podcast, and you're like, Zach, you're delusional. You're soft. How can you back up this claim that UCLA is supposed to be Final Four good, which I've come out and practically said either verbatim or insinuated they're a third weekend of the NCAA tournament team come March and April, which basically means they're a Final Four team. That's the talent they have in the roster. That's what they overhauled for Mick Cronin to replicate what he did a couple of years ago, which was to have a Pac-12 winning team and have a team similar to that of when he went to the Final Four. And you're like, Zach, what are we talking about? Where's the talent? What's with this hype machine that you're talking about? And then you got Mick Cronin sitting after there yelling at his players through the media, through the quotes, saying they're soft. They're delusional about who they are. I'm upset with everyone in that locker room, including his assistant coaches and my players. He's calling out his whole coaching staff. And now they can have more coaches. So that's like as many coaches as there are players. So he's calling out as many as 30 people in that locker room pretty much in terms of why am I the only guy energized about this team? And whether UCLA is soft, whether they're good at this moment, that's not really the question. The real question is how the Bruins snap out of it or improve, because there's a clear weakness on this team. They cannot handle size. Until Adai Mata is ready, until they can combine Mata with William Kyle, or they go small and say, forget the fact that we have two guys who can play either defensively or offensively, but not both ways in the post, we're just going to completely forget that Michigan exists and hope the rest of the teams in the country are not as good and not as big as the Michigans of the world. Maybe as big in the backcourt like New Mexico was when they beat up the Bruins, or how Nebraska had watched UCLA shoot poorly in Lincoln. All right, because the teams with size, the Bruins have struggled with all season long in their three true losses. In the North Carolina game, the Bruins just blew it, absolutely blew it. So where does UCLA go from here? I'm still confident that the Bruins can figure it out. And as long as you avoid a terrible mismatch that is Michigan, maybe they're less delusional. Maybe they're not as soft as Cronin implies, because I think that Michigan Wolverines team is a team to be reckoned with in the Big Ten. I wonder how it's going to go when they play Michigan State, when they play Sparty. That'll be a fun game to watch when it comes down to it in Big Ten play, conference tournament time and everything. But the Bruins have a lot of time. Almost every time Mick Cronin's quoted, whether it's this year, his first year, whatever it is, generally he goes on a tirade. A team plays bad, and they improve. And when they're going through little lulls of the season, it's not how you play here. Even after a big win, it's not how you play now. Maybe it's for seeding. It's how you play in March. It's how you get to March, how you're playing heading into March, and how you go. All right. And Mick Cronin at UCLA in his sixth season has not had a one-and-done team. He's had a team that did not make the postseason last year, so he's trying to redeem himself. So he's extra amped up this year. All right. Last year in his mind was an embarrassment after having the team that he thought could win a national championship with the Hawkeses of the world, Tiger, Singleton, a young Adem Bona, even Amari Bailey as a freshman, and that team flamed out, unfortunately, due to injury, and only because of injury. And then the next year, he goes international, it doesn't work out, Samovic leaves, and that was an embarrassment. So then he's sitting there in this post-game presser against Michigan quoting, I've got 500 wins, I'm not even in my mid-50s, cool. This is a guy that gets to the tournament and can get you to the second weekend, and with UCLA, he went from the first four to the Final Four, which is his greatest achievement as a head coach so far. All right. In a year we did not expect it, he was on the doorstep of getting to a national championship game with a team that we realized, some of these guys are stars and playing well in the NBA. And he got them motivated after terrible losses. All right. And I know some people sit there like, hey, Cronin's too tough on his players. Well, Cronin comes out every single time he has one of these tirades and says, hey, I'm old school. I'm going to tell you the literal truth. And you know how they talk about like old school days, right? You find the bulletin board material. You go find the receipts, as they call it nowadays. Old school be you get the paper, you write it, you put a little pin in it, and you put it up for the whole team to see, for yourself to see, to motivate yourself. Well, Cronin doesn't need bulletin board material. He creates it himself. He gets so fired up, so amped up. He demands the best, all right? And we've come into a day and age of society where some of the top highlight clips of YouTube are third-grade basketball players talking smack to each other in the AAU circuit like it's a big-time game, but they're like 10 years old. That's what we live in right now. Now, do I agree with every little thing that Cronin does on the sideline? No, I think sometimes it's quite ridiculous. And it's just like, dude. But I remember when I was growing up and getting coached, I was probably maybe at the little bit of the end from the lighter coaching style to the harder coaching style. And I myself have turned into a high school coach, high school baseball coach. I'm going through training to learn of what that's like, how you discipline the kids, how you go through that. And we've got a tough-minded head coach over there, all right, in the program I'm working with. And it's trying to balance, how do you motivate the kids? How do you keep them responsible? Cronin's also come out, wins and losses in March for UCLA. We're talking national championships, not Big Ten championships. That is his ultimate goal. And then he also wants to create young men and demand accountability. Now, I'm not exactly sure what happens in these locker rooms, but generally, for the most part, he likes to say that they're pretty good kids, but he demands the best and the most out of them in a UCLA uniform. It's not for everybody. There's different styles that can work better for different players. That's why we saw so many players leave or get kicked out. Maybe not kicked off the team, but said, hey, the door's open for you to walk out. I highly consider doing so with some of these players from last year's team, for a team that was under 500. And now with the expectations so high, that's why the demands are so high for Mick Cronin on this team. He's going to the next level this part of the season because he knows there isn't just a little weak spot in Pac-12 play that they're going to go play. You know, there's always a time in the Pac-12 when UCLA was in it that the bottom tier teams, you go get maybe insert such and such a team with no fans, wherever, during whatever time it was, and you can go get a couple wins, get some hot streak, get up for an Arizona game, get up for a USC game, maybe the upstart team in the Pac-12 that's doing good. Recent years, that had been Colorado. It could all mix. It can change from year to year, and UCLA could go on a run. But he knows this year, you go into Big Ten play, if the Bruins go on a heavy slump, they could easily turn themselves into a 12-loss team, and they're under 500, they're on the bubble, and as much as the work as they've done in the non-conference, that gets erased, especially because a lot of those teams took early L's like North Carolina, Arizona, Gonzaga. They're still good wins for UCLA. They're quad one wins, and the Bruins will have so many chances for a quad one, quad two win, but I don't think they're as soft and delusional as Cronin wants everybody to think. This is a straight challenge to the players that even the LA Times was documenting, hey, not Ben Bolch, this was an opinion, I believe is an opinion column. There's a column written by Dylan Hernandez, a columnist for the LA Times, dropped today, the same day I'm going to drop this podcast on January 8th, and I've kind of gone through the old school ways Mick Cronin's used from his first year at UCLA and how his teams have responded. They've always responded. So to end this first segment, I'm going to leave you with this thought. It's a different style, yes. And I can see you guys in the comments not liking the way he goes about it. The greatest quote is, we're soft and they're delusional. That's the big mantra from this UCLA-Michigan game that we've learned. All right? He doesn't think that the players have the gears to get it. They're not playing good defense. They couldn't handle the physicality when Michigan took it to them. Now, I'd like to disagree with Mick Cronin thinking they're soft because they couldn't beat Michigan. Michigan has a 7-foot point guard and a 7-foot center, all of which can stretch the floor, are more mobile than most of the UCLA players. Just about any team in the country would beg to have one of those players. Michigan has 2 of those players, and their 3 losses have come by a combined 5 points. They turn it over, and UCLA forced some turnovers, but I think Michigan's a real good team, real good shot to go deep in the Big Ten tournament, and probably a good shot if they get good matchups to go deep in the NCAA tournament. Now, how can UCLA use this as motivation? This seems to be an every year calling card for Mick Cronin. I still believe they're good enough to go be successful this year. And the reason why Cronin is going this far, this loudly, this early in January 2025 is because he knows he's got something in his team. It's because he does. He knows he needs to wake up the sleeping giant, the leader, because he doesn't have those 3rd or 4th year players, 5th year players that have been at UCLA, like the Singletons, the Hawkinses, the Tiger Campbells of the world, that he inherited 1 or 2 of those guys and kept them into his style and completely transformed it from Steve Alford. You could look and see at this time right now, Cronin heading into the 6th year and what Alford had, they had similar records, but there's just something about how the Bruins get better, and they're not just always underperforming, they're peaking at the right time. You don't believe me? Well, listen to what I'm about to tell you next on Locked On UCLA. There's a key theme from the 1920 season to now. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or were paying for twice? Well, it's definitely happened to me because I got all these subscriptions. You're like, why am I paying $5 a month for that for like 2 years? What am I wasting? Why am I doing that? I want to go pay for other things, right? Rocket Money can help you track those hidden subscriptions you didn't realize you're paying for. It's having a financial personal assistant that can put everything from unwanted subscriptions, monitor your spending, and lower those bills all into one place and help you with those spending habits you want to hit and set goals with here in 2025. It's saved members up to $740 a year. There's over 5 million users for Rocket Money, and all those users have combined to save $500 million. All right. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. All right, so we're here in the second segment. I talked a lot about what Cronin's doing. I don't think the Bruins are soft. It's just a terrible mismatch. So I disagree with him pointing that towards the Michigan game, but he's going towards a greater purpose. Mick Cronin is aiming towards something greater, which is taking your lumps now and beating all these teams later, which he tends to get this team to do at one point or another, whether they're destined for the NCAA tournament, whether a pandemic hits, or they actually make it all the way to the Final Four. There is a clear growth generally with what UCLA tends to do. All right, let's go to this 1920 season, Cronin's first year. All right, look, this is the paper I've got. If you're watching on YouTube, I've got a paper. I've written quotes that he said, Mick Cronin, UCLA's head coach, over the last 6 years, including this year, and what UCLA was at that game, how they lost, who they lost to, and how they responded afterwards with the final result. Okay, 2019 to 2020 season. All right, so that season obviously didn't end with any NCAA tournament for anybody. COVID hit, pandemic, cool. UCLA in 2020, early 2020, lost to Stanford at home 74-59. This was a Stanford team that was 15-2, improved to 4-0 in the Pac-12. UCLA was at the time 8-9 and 1-3 in Pac-12 play. Cronin comes out and says, our selfishness is evident. Basically calling his players selfish. Okay. We have guys who refuse to listen and follow orders, so therefore they don't get to play. Does that sound like 1 or 2 players every single year in the Cronin system? Yeah, I would circle that player to be this year. I'm not going to say he's selfish, but for whatever reason, that guy in the doghouse this year, it's Dominic Harris. It's clear as day. Okay, not saying he's selfish. That's just the guy in the doghouse for Cronin. It happens every year. Back to his quote. So he's called his team selfish, says they don't refuse to play, and he said, I'm done. I told them I'm done protecting them, which he technically said before about the guys not following orders, but I'm done protecting you guys. I need guys to play. And UCLA was 8-9 and then 1-3 in Pac-12 play. Like, that was a team that lost to Hofstra, lost to Cal State Fullerton. Cronin's first game, they were about to lose to a Long Beach State team in 2019-2020. And that Long Beach State team that year was not that good. They almost lost to two Big West teams. They did lose to one and lost to Hofstra, all at home. And then next thing you know, Cronin is calling out his team in early 2020 with a terrible start against Stanford, who was a good Stanford team. Jared Haas was still their coach. UCLA, in their next 14 games, after calling them out against Stanford, after the game against Stanford, they go 11-3. They were a bubble team. They go 19-12 to finish the season. Overall, they're 19-12, 12-6 in Pac-12 play, so they're near the top 3 or 4 teams in the Pac-12. And Cronin wins his first Pac-12 Coach of the Year award and was getting so much praise, so much hype for where UCLA was the year before in 18-19. An embarrassment at the end of the Steve Alford era. An embarrassment. And Cronin got them playing hard with the baby Hawkeses of the world. This was pre-Johnny Juzang. This was a team that's like, who are we? Who are we? They found themselves, and then COVID robbed us of a chance to see how this team could have finished. Okay, so Cronin won Pac-12 Coach of the Year, probably would have gotten the tournament. It's debatable. I know they released things, but it's different when UCLA didn't play in a Pac-12 tournament, which they would have been able to. UCLA clearly got so much better. Who's got a job right now? Not the Stanford coach from 1920. Mick Cronin does. Stanford's coach got fired. Let's go to the 2020-2021 season. All right, UCLA, they had a lot of these guys coming back. They had found a gem in the portal, early portal find for Mick Cronin with Johnny Juzang. And then next thing you know, they had a pretty successful season. Now, a lot of that season, especially for the California teams, came in the bubble. Little to no fans in attendance in most of these games. And of course, the tournament was played all in the state of Indiana in a different structure. They couldn't pretty much hang out with friends or family for an entire season. And the season started later than normal, right? I think it was after Thanksgiving in late 2020. They had to test, games canceled, completely different year. But the story goes on. UCLA was really good. They did lose to San Diego State to start the year by 15. They had to go to triple overtime in their first one of the year to beat Pepperdine of all teams. And then, all right, UCLA starts to be successful throughout this 2020-2021 campaign. Then at the end of the year, they just hit a wall. They forgot how to keep leads. What Cronin was talking about, UCLA lost to Oregon State 83-79 in overtime in the Pac-12 tournament, all right? In 2021, Cronin questioned his team's toughness then. In my mind, it's a lack of toughness. And then he talks about how from the first play of the second half, we put in no effort defensively at all, saying his team is basically not trying. So he said his team was not trying in a game they lost in overtime in a Pac-12 conference tournament game against the team that eventually made the Elite Eight. Oregon State eventually made the Elite Eight. He's still calling out his team that took them to overtime on a neutral court after a year of being stuck in a bubble, testing again and again. And he says, we're not tough enough. We put in no effort at all. UCLA lost 4 straight games. They were 17-9, a bubble tournament team, right? They lost to SC heartbreak in a heartbreak. Every single game seemed to be the same story with that 4-game losing streak, which could have ended their season, quite frankly. Well, the committee stuck them in there as one of the last 4 teams in, putting them in the first 4, slotting them in with the big name matchup against Michigan State in the first 4. The Bruins, who were 17-9 at the time, got down double digits against Michigan State. All of a sudden, showcased a complete turnaround in that game, used that momentum to go to a Final Four. So after that loss to Oregon State, where Cronin again questioned their toughness, where they've been grinding all year during a weird COVID season, 17-9, where they could have had a much better seeding, been firmly in like the early work had proven, they won 5 straight games to get to the Final Four. And yes, hey, did they beat Abilene Christian? Yes, they beat Abilene Christian. Thank goodness, because that was a huge one for them to upset Texas. They beat BYU. BYU is no slouch. Michigan State didn't end up being a slouch. And then who they beat? They beat a 2-seed Alabama, even though they blew that lead late, won in overtime. They beat Michigan, ironically, brings us back to Michigan, who was a 1 seed, took them to the Final Four. and the overall number 1 seed UCLA playing Gonzaga with the lights, the national television, everything on them. Nobody in the stands, basically. But against the number 1 team, unbeaten Gonzaga Bulldogs, UCLA was toe-to-toe in a charge call against Johnny Juzang away from either winning that game early or a missed half-court shot at the buzzer from getting that game to double overtime against what teams and many pundits had thought was going to win the national championship, and then it was Baylor. So UCLA was that close getting to a national championship game. With everything crumbling, Cronin calls them out. They figure it out. A Johnny Juzang moment later and complete reversal of being not clutch into clutch. UCLA took down a 1-2-6 seed and almost took down the number 1 overall seed in one of the most classic games of all time in the Final Four, and UCLA got Mick Cronin to his first Final Four. All right. So then the next year, UCLA's got a lot of hype on them. They got a lot of hype. A lot of hype heading into 21, 22, with almost all those guys coming back. So let's talk about it. What I circled as the moment for UCLA was UCLA was 17-5 at this point. They had just lost to USC in the Galen Center, 67-64. This is early 2022. This is when Cronin couldn't figure out Andy Enfield. They couldn't beat the Trojans. It was just a curse at this point. This is what Cronin said after the USC game in 2022, his 3rd year in the job. My concern right now is defensively, we can't get the job done. Until we do, we're not going to win any games. UCLA had a good start to this season. They were feeling themselves. This was a really good team. I believe that was the year they beat Villanova early, but don't quote me on that. I'm going through a lot of seasons. They had big wins early. Fans were just being able to get back in the stands, and we were reopening as a state. In that stretch, UCLA had lost 3 of 4, including losing both in the Arizona schools at Arizona, losing in triple overtime, I believe, at Arizona State, won a game and then lost at USC, so they're in a dreadful stretch. Dreadful stretch. We're not going to win any game. We're not getting the job done. Our defense is so terrible. Cronin on another angry stretch because they couldn't guard Drew Peterson, and USC, I believe, was out Mobley, Isaiah Mobley, one of their best players, and the Bruins couldn't beat USC on the road, which should have been a UCLA win. They couldn't. They lost 3 out of 4. In a slump, heartbreaking losses, and to respond in their next 10 games, UCLA goes 8-2, makes it to the Pac-12 tournament championship game. They get to a Sweet 16 where they're leading at the half before Caleb Love goes on fire and eventually takes the Tar Heels to the national championship game where they could have won that. And the Bruins are that close to beating the Tar Heels, playing St. Peter's in the Elite Eight where they could have gotten to the Final Four and maybe to a national championship game. So just some of these tournament games flip in their favor one way or the other. They're in a championship game or maybe winning those. Who knows? That's not what we're debating right now. What we're debating is after Cronin calls them out, they go 10-3 and get to a Sweet 16. 10-3 and get to a Sweet 16 to end the Johnny Juzang era while still bringing back Tiger Campbell and bringing back Jaime Jaquez Jr. We're going to go that next year after break. So those 3 years, his first 3 years, has a call-out moment. And the Bruins immediately respond to either go from out of tournament contention / under 500 to getting Pac-12 Coach of the Year, his first year. Year 2 gets to the Final Four. Year 3 is on the verge to a Sweet 16 berth where one thing or two things go right down the stretch and they're cruising into a third weekend potentially. Now let's go over these last couple of years, which have seen the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. All right, we're wrapping things up. What we're doing right now is kind of seeing what Mick Cronin's style is, right? He's called his team soft. He called his staff. He's saying, I'm disappointed with all my players and my staff. We're soft. We're delusional. We're basically a mess. And it seems like every single one of there's a section of the UCLA fan base, you guys listening, watching, who disagree that this team can still be successful. Now they're not where they need to be to do so. And if Mick Cronin does not have a successful year, then UCLA, I believe, Julio Frank, the new chancellor came in, which means maybe we're going to figure things out. If Cronin does not have a successful year with this team, then all of a sudden, what was a seat that is nowhere close to being a hot seat, maybe it slowly starts burning, because that'd be back-to-back years in a new day and age where he went one way, he's gone another way with his recruiting, and it fails. So I understand if this continues to fail, then UCLA, I'm going to jump on that bandwagon like, hey, well, what's going on? I'm not there yet. They're not that part of the season where they're there yet. And until UCLA's literal last game before the tournament, we're not going to know because Cronin can sometimes ignite the flame at the last moment, and the Bruins make a run with a good draw, and here they are looking for another national championship, right? But I understand where people disagree with his style. They say players don't come. Well, we got to have a mix of not coddling players, but also not just beating them with our verbal and antics, everything on the sideline. And Cronin pushes the line, toes the line so closely, if not going over the line quite a few times. But it continues to work. Let's talk about the team that won the Pac-12. Spoiler alert. UCLA, when you had a good team, a team we didn't know what they were going to be like after Juzang left, after no Jules Bernard. You bring in a five-star like Amari Bailey. We didn't know what a Dembona was going to be to replace the Cody Rileys of the world. And both of those turned into all Pac-12 freshmen, Pac-12 freshman of the year, and an elite Pac-12 defensive player of the year with Jalen Clark, who throughout this tenure has slowly turned into one of the best defensive players in the country, winning the National Defensive Player of the Year award, okay, while his offensive game blossomed. UCLA went to Vegas, and anytime UCLA goes to Vegas, anywhere in Nevada, they suck. It's guaranteed. It just tends to be a guarantee. The Bruins lost to Baylor 80-75 in the early part of the 22-23 season. They had just had a big lead against Illinois, gave up 80 points, 79 points. So in 2 games, UCLA gave up on average 80 points to their opponents, Illinois and Baylor, on neutral floors. That is not going to make Cronin happy. So this is what Cronin's then famous tirade was. He was heard screaming in the locker room, echoing through the halls by the media in Vegas about how disappointed he was in his team after those 2 games, and that put UCLA out of the national limelight for a while. So UCLA was told by their coach through the media, one thing you know about me, I tell guys the truth. Not popular in this era, but don't really care. And he also came out and said, we're bad. We're bad defensively. And that's a team that had the National Defensive Player of the Year and an uber athletic Dembona winning the Pac-12 Freshman Year of the Award. And that's not because he was great offensively. It's because he was elite defensively and athletic when he wasn't in foul trouble. So what did UCLA, after going 3-2, losing 2 terrible games in Vegas, playing no defense, all the players like, what are we going to do? The Bruins, following that tirade from Mick Cronin, mind you, that's senior Jaime Jaquez Jr., that's 5th-year Tiger Campbell, 4th year playing under Mick Cronin. Singleton's on this team, so he's a super senior for UCLA with the COVID year given back for the Bruins. I tell guys the truth. He was basically calling his team selfish. Talk about history repeating itself there. Team selfish, doesn't play defense. We're bad. We're bad. Comes out, and they go from 3-2 to 31-6 overall, 18-2 in Pac-12 play. After this tirade, UCLA won 14 straight games. 14 straight games. You know the game they lost was at Arizona in a low-scoring defensive grind of a game against a team that was a top 10 team in Arizona. Then UCLA, after a couple games, went on another 12-game winning streak. Won the Pac-12 regular season by a few games. All right? They won the Pac-12 regular season, got some revenge to end the regular season by beating Arizona at Pauley Pavilion. Got to the Pac-12 tournament final. Dembona was hurt. Jalen Clark got hurt. So that really derailed the season. And yet still, with Gonzaga and Drew Timme having all the size and the power in the world, and Kenny Nuba playing with the horrible hip injury, the Bruins were able to scrap and claw and nearly get themselves into the Elite Eight if it wasn't for another miracle half-court 3 by Gonzaga in the Sweet 16. So to end that year, UCLA had 2 separate 12-plus game winning streaks after this tirade. They won the Pac-12. Mick Cronin wins his 2nd Pac-12 Coach of the Year award. And then UCLA goes on and gets to a Sweet 16. Could have gotten to an Elite Eight where I believe they would have faced UConn and most likely been demolished because they were too hurt. This is what I believe to be one of UCLA's best teams in Mick Cronin's era. You can debate if the year before was, when they had Juzang, the first year, and Jules Bernard and all those guys. This was a team that was driven. And if Clark doesn't hurt his Achilles, even with a Dembona's hurt shoulder, they could still go pretty far. But without those guys, the Bruins still responded, and that tells you about the makeup of the team that year. Okay, You're like, Zach, that's easy. Those are teams that all made the tournament. What about the team that was awful last year with a lot of freshmen and, quite frankly, a recruiting class that hasn't panned out with all the international recruits? A lot of these guys left. I got you. So I circled the 23-24 campaign. UCLA went to Utah. We all remember this in early 2024. Losing 90-44. This was the Lazar Stefanovic return to Salt Lake City when they were just calling him a traitor, booing him. UCLA lost 8 of 9 games. They had 4 straight losses. They fell to 6-10, 1-4 in Pac-12 play. Last year in the Pac-12, and the Bruins are getting embarrassed, losing to CSUN, losing to Maryland at home, just getting completely beat up by these teams they should have handled at home. But clearly, we're not ready. Losing by 46 to Utah, giving up 90 points, and flat out embarrassed. All right, Cronin came out and said nobody needs to feel sorry for them. I tried to tell them Saturday, the previous game, we got our butts kicked every way we could. I got no positive for you in a player. He talked about how he got out coached, everything. Said, we got our butts kicked. Nobody feels sorry for them. Why are you going to feel sorry for yourself? You lost by 46 on the road at Utah, and they were there to just ridicule Lazar for transferring to UCLA, and then the Runnin' Utes came out and blew out the Bruins. Blew them out in that game. A team that stood after that loss 6-10 and had 4 straight losses after that game in early 2024. After this game, UCLA went 8-1, including their one loss of having a huge lead at a top 10, top 5 Arizona game where they did blow, but they went 8-1 their next 9 games. And from 6-10, got to 16-16 at the end of the regular season, 10-10 in Pac-12 play, and then, 15-16 around there. And were one layup away from beating a team in the Pac-12 tournament that they themselves, Oregon, went on a run to the NCAA tournament and went on a mini run to get there. All right? So Cronin, even with one of his worst teams, after what was the ugliest game I've seen a UCLA Mick Cronin coach team play, they turned it around and went 8-1, and against one of the best teams they played a very good game, even though they lost that game in Tucson, and showed some heart and resolve. Yes, they did fade down the stretch, but after, you smack a Utah Ute in the face in Los Angeles and get ejected, that really derailed the season. Still, they found a lot of moxie and growth. So even in their bestest seasons and their trying seasons, there is a trend, as detailed also by Dylan Hernandez in the LA Times column about this. Cronin has a way, despite everybody disliking it, despite the outside sources, despite the change of society, how we coach players, the old school method's kind of going out. We don't just scream and break guys, maybe unless it's like football, right? And then we don't see these guys stick around wrong, right? We see Jay Wright retired. We see Tony Bennett gone. We've seen John Calipari going from Kentucky to Arkansas. He wanted out. He wanted to get out there. We've seen Nick Saban leave this day and age. He's an old school guy. He'd tell you like how it is. Telling me people aren't listening to Nick Saban. So now here's Mick Cronin. It's like, is he soft and delusional? Is he the one that's delusional? Is he? He has high expectations for this team. Am I delusional for thinking this team can get out of it? The results speak for themselves every single year, which makes this one interesting with a lot of excitement, a lot of NIL bucks, with him claiming himself to be the general manager, basically, of this team, the key recruiter, getting the money needed to get this team together that he pretty much assembled without a true center because he believes a lot in Mata. Then UCLA at 11-4 is nowhere near as bad as they were last year. They're well on par with the teams previous and have similar guys in roles that are like the guys in years previous, right? Well, now UCLA, Cronin said, we're soft, we're delusional. I'm upset with everyone in the locker room. Only time will tell. I can't answer that right now. This team is going to have to prove themselves to Cronin as a tough defensive team. And kind of going back to this article written by Dylan Hernandez, this is what he said. This is also the response from Eric Daly Jr. in his press conference. The second leading scorer, Eric Daly Jr., I would say he's one of the toughest guys. He's got a beat-up face with the mask because he's got popped in the face in the North Carolina game. He's tough, man. This guy is having to play through some injury. I know we're not soft. I'm definitely not soft. The man next to me is not soft. Talk about Tyler Bilodeau, who in the broadcast, they always talk about him not being soft because his parents both played some of the highest level of pro collegiate sports, basketball and hockey. And then Daly said, Those guys in the locker room are not soft. Those are just words right now. We got to show them we're tough. So it's just motivation to fight. And that's the reaction. After all this is what he wants. He wants that guy to come up and say, I want to be a leader. Is it going to be Bilodeau? Is it going to be Daly? Is it going to be a vocal leader? Is it a leader by example? Is it multiple of those guys that say, we've got to be better? Now you play Michigan, you lose to them again. It's not because they weren't tough. It's because they got a bad matchup. Maybe they could have handled this stretch better. And that's what Cronin wants. When things are going wrong, but the momentum's still in your way, you can't lose that game by 19 at home when you had 2 7-footers in severe foul trouble. All right? Now, Daly came out and said, we're not soft. It's motivation to fight. The exact emotion that Cronin wants to elicit. So don't be surprised if this team goes on a run. Maybe it's not 20 games in a row. Maybe it's 10-2. But look how they play in their losses, and look how much better they play in their wins. Those are things to look forward to for this UCLA team in the upcoming weeks, because it's only going to get tougher. They got to go east. Maryland, a scrappy Rutgers team. We're going to be fired up to have UCLA come into Piscataway. A lot of these teams are going to be super hyped up to bring UCLA coming to town. In Indiana, they're having a struggle start of the season. They're going to be excited when the Bruins come to Bloomington. You're telling me Illinois is going to be just as excited, or Purdue, or Northwestern? All these teams UCLA's got to go on the road, and there will be tough places to play, whether it's Mackey Arena or going to Bloomington. And even these games at home, they are still tough. They still got to host Oregon, a sellout crowd I'm assuming they'll be expecting at Galen Center. And they got to go to Seattle and play Washington again. Expecting that to be easy? No. I'm not. Cronin's not. That's what he's trying to tell his team. He just does it differently. Now, we'll tell you, if UCLA fails to succeed, if they go under 500 to Big Ten play, if they miss the tournament, if they flame out in the first round, okay, not good. That's just not what I expect this team to do. And what I just spent close to 30 minutes talking about, every single time this team has responded. Different guys, different players, but the eras of college basketball have changed from pre-COVID to during COVID to post-COVID, from the NIL, the transfer portal, and the COVID year. Those have all generated different responses. And Mick Cronin almost always has gotten the most positive of responses and gets victories and results and improvements and helps these players grow as players and hopefully as young men, which is both his ultimate goal, to raise a banner at UCLA and develop these guys into quality guys with great character. And I think that's what's going to happen. That's why Sebastian Mack stayed. He didn't have to stay. Could have got run out of town. I think these guys will answer the bell. And this is Mick Cronin going, ding, ding. That's it. Let's get our hands up for an 8-clap, Bruins fans, because now it's a sitting and wait game, and we'll see how good this team is. All right. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA, fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Like, comment, tell me what you think. Tell me what you think. We're probably going to disagree on many aspects of this, but the results, they speak for themselves. Can he do it again? History points to it, but it doesn't always work that way. So tell me what your thoughts are. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.